Hi everyone, welcome. What you see here is my so-called mixed red worm bin. And the mixed red worm bin has got a few other different names, but basically it's thought to be the pretty well-known combination of red wigglers, European night crawlers, and blue worms living in harmony in the worm bin. And they do seem to do a pretty good job. Now, this doesn't look exactly the way it was when we left it 10 days ago. There's one difference here, which is the plastic bag that I positioned over the feeding end of the bin. If you've been here before, then you'll know that this bin has been set up as sort of a continuous flow sort of a system, and I keep going this way, but it's really this way because the finished castings keep getting pushed this way, and then the new stuff gets piled in this side. Let's get this little wormy off the top covering newspaper. And you see how it's really wet? That was the whole idea. By placing the plastic on top here, my idea was to force the recirculation of moisture underneath the plastic, allowing this side to remain exposed to the air. And that doesn't matter because this is the side that we consider to be the finished castings end, where the worms really have no further work to do. There's no fresh bedding, no fresh food. All the fresh bedding, fresh food goes into the opposite end. And the whole idea behind this being a continuous system is that you don't, at some point, try to screen the material, separate the worms from their castings, harvest the castings, relocate the worms into a new home. Instead, the worms always stay present in this system, and you keep scooping the finished stuff out, and you keep piling in the fresh stuff on the opposite end. So, you know, all these little white insects that you see cruising around, those are springtails. This system's been showing signs of springtail activity for some time now, but another type of insect, which most people would say is not beneficial the way a springtail is in your worm bins, is fruit flies and gnats. And what kind of insects they actually are that I see in here, I don't know. But before we stir the contents of the system up, I wanted to apply some of this liquid. This liquid is my BTI mosquito dunks solution. And I remember somebody in a video, or maybe in a comment to one of my videos, mentioned how those flying insects do tend to live on the top surface of the material that they occupy. So if you want to try to treat the flying insects, you do so before you agitate the material and stir it all up. So a lot of times when I want to apply the BTI, I sort of forget to do it that way, and I kind of come in and apply it as an afterthought. But today I remembered that it's best done prior. Now, something we did last week was we came in here with my transport container, and we hauled out a bunch of the finished castings from this side of the bin, enough to fill this thing up. And I took it straight outside, gave it to my plants. I'm sure they were very happy to receive that stuff. So it was my best guess that if we were to come in here to pull out even more, we'd probably be able to extract just as much again as we did last time if we wanted to. But I limited myself to whatever would fit into this, and we left the rest for another harvest of the finished castings at some other point of time in the future. And as we were going through this stuff, we did sort of at the same time try to pick out any sort of little residual scraps of stuff that's floating around in it that's not entirely castings, maybe just some residual bits of bedding that ended up over there. And there are some pretty good sized clumpy chunks in here too, but whatever, it's not a big deal. It does seem to me like if I were to go and start scooping stuff out of here, I could probably go about the width of a good scoop and still have material that's basically worm free, and that would probably be enough to fill up the transport container a second time. But we're not going to do that. We're going to let it ride. Maybe during the next check-in we could do another harvest of castings out of here. I figured we'd gradually make our way over to this next middle portion, which is really just what had been the previous feeding zone, nudged over to make room for a really generously revamped feeding zone. So everything you see here pretty much from here on over, was all put in here brand new last week. And it almost looks to me, based on what I'm seeing over here, that the worms have almost abandoned the old stuff in favor of all the freshly added new stuff over on the opposite end. So perhaps it would make good sense here too to just pick out these larger chunks of food items, such as, I don't know, this is maybe the stem of a banana. I know I saw, here's another one, stem of a banana, another one, stem of a banana. And then some of these larger chunks of bedding type materials, some larger pieces of newspaper and stuff. Because hey, if the worms aren't going to hang out over there to break this stuff down, I might as well move the stuff over to where the action is. Kind of making me wonder, what is it like over in the feeding zone? I did sort of expect that there'd be at least a few worms hanging out here, and there are. I do see a couple. Certainly not many, but I thought that maybe there'd be a few more. Perhaps by having the plastic coverings over here and causing the recirculation of moisture to occur over there, perhaps it created such a comfortable place for the worms to be that they came over to this side, realized that it wasn't quite as nice as over there, and they just hightailed it back over to that end. So maybe I've just got to position that plastic covering so that it covers even more of this material, so that this sort of partially broken down but not totally broken down material in the middle would still stand a chance at seeing some worm activity and some further breakdown to get it to that finished state as well. So yeah, rather than trying to pick out all the stuff that still needs work and moving it over, maybe we'll just do that. We'll come back in with that plastic covering again today and position it perhaps a little bit further inboard so that more of the stuff that needs work is covered up with plastic, forcing the recirculation of the moisture. So kind of makes me wonder, how are things over in the feeding zone side? This bin has seen a lot of springtails, not just those couple that we saw on the top covering feeding zone indicator, but here and there, once in a while, when you dig down into this system, you find large quantities of the springtails hanging out in here. Good number of worms occupying this system. The last feeding started out with a bunch of this shredded paper and cardboard mix, on top of which I placed little bundles of food, basically napkins, into which I had placed some stuff like cucumber peels and, well, whatever, a variety of different types of foods. And I guess with napkins or paper towels or whatever it was that I had placed the foods into, that stuff is so thin and lightweight, perhaps the worms, as they were making their way in towards the food that was nested inside those napkins and paper towels, maybe they just went ahead and ate those napkins and paper towels in the process of trying to get over to the food. So I thought that we'd maybe come in with a little bit more supplementary bedding to see if we could further build out the environment for the worms to occupy. I keep feeling like they're so crammed into such a tight little space. I keep feeling like I'd like to build it out for them so that they've got a little bit more space to occupy. So for that reason, I've got a couple more pieces of soiled paper that I'd like to incorporate into the feeding. A couple, I guess that was a paper towel, and this I suppose is a napkin. And the amount of food I've got today is not quite as much as I had last time. It's just a little bit of coffee, a day's worth of coffee, as well as a cucumber, which I had on the top shelf of my refrigerator, perhaps too close to the freezer because it froze, spoiling it. So it's not a whole lot, not like last time. Last time I think we gave them, I don't know, probably at least twice as much as this. So I figured we'd do the same again. We'll just take these delicious morsels and bundle them into pieces of fairly thin, easy to eat paper. Yeah, you can see. Man, my cucumber plants out in the garden, they are producing so many cucumbers. I'm gonna have to share I'm going to take some to my mom's house tomorrow. I'm invited to dinner over there, so she'll usually invite a couple of her girlfriends over there too, so maybe I'll even bring a couple extras so I can share some, not only with my mom, but also with a couple of her girlfriends. Because I think the plants have suddenly kicked it into high gear and they're just producing way more than I can consume around here. So, in pursuit of a nicely and generously replenished feeding zone, we'll spray in a little bit of this, or sprinkle in a little bit of this prepared stuff. And then our feeding zone indicator can also go in as supplementary bedding, since part of what they're getting today is a day's worth of coffee, which does include a additional coffee filter. So I guess besides the coffee and the cucumber, I've also got my worm chow on standby. The worm chow I like to place into my worm bins in conjunction with the coffee, trying to make the coffee just a little bit more interesting for the worms. But you know what, before we place that in there, I've also got my grit here. And I'm going to sprinkle some grit, pulverized eggshell basically, onto the feeding. And then we could set this coffee filter aside to become our feeding zone indicator at the end. So the worm chow is mainly bird seed on this go around. I also ground up some peanut shells into it. Then I did find a tiny bit of leftover pancake / waffle mix that I also blended in after the fact, so it hopefully ends up becoming a worm chow that the worms enjoy eating. And then, kind of like we did last time, I'm going to come in with just a little bit more of my prepared bedding to top off the feeding. And then I thought that maybe we can also dampen things just a little bit more using my my BTI solution here. I got to admit, this time I didn't really see too many flying insects buzzing around here like I did the last time we checked in here. Last time I saw a couple of flying insects moving around in here when we first got in here, and it immediately made me think, hey, I gotta whip up a batch of BTI solution and dump it in there. And I doubt that it would have had an effect so quickly. Perhaps I just scared the flying insects away, and maybe now they're occupying another of my bins. I guess maybe I'm in for another surprise in another of my bins elsewhere one of these days soon. Alright, so back on goes the feeding zone indicator, except this time it's a nice brand new replacement feeding zone indicator, and all the top coverings can go back in just the way we found them, with the exception of what we mentioned earlier, which was to reposition this plastic covering to not be so pressed up against the far edge, but rather inboard a little bit more to cover even more of the bin. Pretty much a little bit beyond halfway point, and that should cover up not only the freshly added stuff, but some of that stuff that's kind of far along but still needs some more work to get to the finish line. So that's it for our check-in, folks. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.